Welcome to Accelerate My Practice. So glad you could join me here today. Today I want to bring in an expert, an AR ninja, someone who can slice your AR in half. He's a friend of mine I've known for a while, Andy Cleveland, so I want to bring him into the conversation, and today we're going to focus purely on how do we improve revenue cycle, AR issues, any of those sorts of things. So with that, I want to thank you, Andy, for joining me today, and I'm so appreciative of you being willing to come on here, share your content, share your ideas with our team, and give us a brief introduction of what fires you up about dentistry, and then we'll get into some of the content.
Hey, Darren, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. And really the whole goal today is to try to give the dentist some ideas on what's out there and how they can improve their practice. So we're all kind of on the same page. But I specialize in the accounts receivable sector of dental practice management, which is everyone's favorite topic, not. So we really help specialize in helping practices become more profitable, developing strategies to help reduce their accounts receivable, and ultimately make them happier, healthier, and more profitable.
You know, what's awesome about what you say, and one of the things that we talk about all the time are what are our priorities when it comes to business philosophy. And our priorities, just to review for everybody else out there, is first and foremost is cash flow. If your cash flow is not healthy, you go out of business fast. Secondly is hygiene flow. Thirdly is periodontal disease. Fourthly is case acceptance. And then lastly is marketing. So you fit perfectly in terms of our number one priority as to where we always start, and it's looking at AR issues. So let's start by talking about the diagnostic side of things. Where should a practice be in terms of their AR? What's acceptable or normal to have outstanding?
Yeah, so this is a really common question. I'm going to give you the book answer, and then I'll kind of give you a real-world answer, because every practice is uniquely different. I think we need to respect that. There's no cookie-cutter approach necessarily. Most of the experts are going to agree that somewhere between a half to a month of production, if that's exceeded, then they're carrying too much AR. Dental philosophy typically is to not finance patients, which ultimately you would just get paid, and just like you go to Walmart, you get your services, you pay, and then you walk out. But sometimes patients, if you have a complex treatment plan or there's financial issues, sometimes you have to work with the patient so that you ultimately help them. So the real world answer is that each dental practitioner has their own level of acceptability with risk, and they have different unique needs. So a dental practitioner coming straight out of dental school that's carrying $350,000 or more of debt just for dental school may need to get paid much quicker, faster, and maybe let more risk averse than someone that's been around for 10 or 15 years, and they've got a healthy patient base and they're willing to take some risks. So some practitioners say 2 or 3% is too much, and they want to know how to solve that. And some have 20% on their books, and they don't see it as a big deal. So I would say it's more individual response specificity as far as the dental practice, what their element or what their perspective is on how much is too much.
I would completely agree with that. And one of the pieces of that I always use to help that process is expectations. I find myself that if we set great expectations when we're talking about the case, about how the AR is going to function, about how that process is going to roll, that it greatly improves and helps that whole process. And without it, I find that it causes big issues. So to me, most of the times when it comes to this, it's mismatched expectations. Like I expect you as the dentist to be the bank, and you expect me to pay, and we've not discussed this.
Sure. And what about your expectations of your staff? If you don't expect your staff to collect at the time of service, then most likely they're not going to be focused on it, and they're going to let patients walk out the door. So it is a skill and art on setting proper expectations and having a culture of how you want your business to actually be run, and having those parameters and making sure that your staff has the tools that are needed to fit those expectations. I can't even tell you how many practices I've talked to that literally they just tell the patient, we'll figure out your insurance later, we'll send you a bill. And they're just letting money walk out the door.
Totally agree with that. There's so many opportunities that are just squandered, and you're right. It comes back to culture and philosophy of the team and how we all think collectively, and are we willing to accept being the bank? And I saw an article recently that was published that was written about, hey, did you go to dental school to be a banker? Right. And it was an interesting article because obviously nobody did. If you did, you'd check people's credit. And yet, how many dentists go in and actually check the patient's credit before they extend them a ton of credit? And the one who they're extending the credit to has terrible credit. There's a reason why maybe they don't qualify for credit with Care Credit or somewhere else.
Sure, absolutely.
Outside of setting better expectations, what are some of the tools or techniques that you find to either one, to me it's like two issues. One, how do we stop the problem? And then two, how do we unwind the problem? And where would you start there?
Well, prevention, of course, is superior to any type of cure that you could provide on the back end. So doing anything you can to collect them from the patient today is key. So that's proper verification of insurance and benefits, making sure you have a good estimate, and making sure that your staff actually asks for the money. So if you can prevent you having to carry that AR, then, of course, you're never going to have the problem. So it's akin to tooth decay versus pulling the tooth. When you have bad debt write-offs, that's pulling teeth. Patient's not happy, neither is the practitioner. It hurts, it's costly, and it's counterintuitive. So anything you can do, from training your staff, asking for the money, estimating properly, and setting that expectation on the front end is great. To answer your question on the back end, anything you can be creatively different than every other person in your town. So think about it. Your patient probably has a car, unless they walk to their office, but most actually drive, and they have cell phones, and they have houses, and all these other obligations. And how do everyone else in their town, how do most businesses bill, Darren? Do they bill weekly, monthly, quarterly? How does that work?
Obviously the answer varies in the town, and we've got clients all over the country. So I would say, though, if I were to wage a guess, probably the majority do statements on a monthly basis, which I think is a little crazy, but that's a whole other issue. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so if you bill monthly, you're in the group, in the category with everybody else in town. And who are they going to pay first, their car payment or their cell phone or you? So one very practical advice that I could give would be to bill more frequently than everybody else in town to have a heightened sense of awareness. The second thing is to be creative in how you do it. If you're using just a standard e-bill and it just looks like every other EOB or junk mail that your patient would get, it's going to be disregarded. So anything you can do to spruce it up, make it look different, use some colors, different envelopes, anything you can do there to make your bill stand out a little bit more is going to get you a better response.
Let me ask you a question. What percentage of practices do you see that have an online portal for a patient to pay their bill online?
Yeah, I don't have anything statistical to back that up, but if you made me guess, I would say it's less than 10%, although that's changing frequently. And I encourage all dental offices to, on their website, have the ability for a patient to pay online. I mean, think about it. Your patients are just as busy as you are. They're at their jobs. They're taking their kids to soccer practice. They have busy lives, and they may not have time to call in and make a payment over the phone, or they're just forgetful. So how cool is that for them to be able to get online before they go to bed and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to pay this bill. Let me jump online like they do with every other vendor that they have and pay online. And it reduces any uncomfortable feelings between you and your staff, especially if they're delinquent. The last thing they want to do is call the office and admit to your front desk staff or your office manager that they're late and get into kind of an uncomfortable situation for everyone. So that's a great recommendation, Darren.
I find, I would agree with your guess of 10%. I don't have data either, but I know I pay all of my bills either online or they're auto pay onto a credit card, and I don't actually write a check. I don't actually call anybody. We have one vendor actually that doesn't fit into that, and it's annoying. So if I think about consumer psychology, how people are used to doing business, why not fit that? Why swim upstream instead of doing it the way everybody else does? So to me, that would be one of the most obvious and simple solutions, would be just to add the ability to receive payment online.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure your website, has mobile or tablet capability. That's another trend that's undeniable. That people are converting from, desktop machines on your dental website to mobile technology, and I believe that trend's going to continue. So having that ability is key.
Now, question for you, and maybe this is a little controversial, but since you're here, and I probably should have asked you this ahead of time, every now and then you'll hear someone who will talk about, hey, should we offer a discount in order to clean up old debt? And I get the reality of it is, if I go to a collection agency, I could lose 50% as an example, or whatever it might be, but some significant percentage. So does it make sense to offer someone a deal in order to try and get that money cleaned up? Do you have opinions on that matter?
Yeah, I haven't thought too much about it, but I'm not opposed to it if it's in the best interest of the practice. You're right. If you're going to give up a significant portion of your money to someone else and alienate the patient, maybe it makes sense. Some dentists, will actually forgive the debt. So it depends on your philosophy. But I would say doing anything you can to avoid the confrontation of having to use a collection company is fantastic, because ultimately you want to keep the patient. Your patients probably aren't bad people, right? They're normal, average Americans just like everybody else. They're just overwhelmed. I read a CNN Money article the other day. I can send it to any of your viewers if you like, that 1 in 3 people in the United States is in collections. And the average balance is $5,200, according to this article in CNN Money. And so, you're getting grouped with everyone else. So if you don't make it a priority to get the patient to pay, then you're going to be overlooked, because you can't take your dentistry back. It's not like you can take the car back or shut the cell phone off or foreclose on the house.
Well, and I think that's why, regarding stopping this from the beginning, having proper expectation is of great importance. And that's a staggering number, that a third of the country. You would have thought after 2008, people would have learned a lesson of, hey, we shouldn't spend 100. I remember in 2007 reading an article from the Wall Street Journal saying that average Americans spent 114% of their income. And I just sat there going, this isn't sustainable. This is going to implode. And sure enough, a year and a half later, it did implode. But what it tells me is we have short-term memory issues and we don't learn our lessons, and it's rather scary. Do you find one of the things that we suggest to help this is, if we're sending out letters to patients, and we're getting to the point where we're getting near collection agencies, we usually have a stepped system that we would recommend. And one of the things we'd recommend is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Patient, I really don't want to hit your credit with this. So I would really like to find a way to come to some resolution. Here's a deadline of a date. So, because some people are so weird about their credit that I find it to be a great motivator. Now, obviously, the third of Americans who are already in collection issues, maybe it's not an issue, but I find that we're not actually going to probably report it to a credit agency because we don't have the time to do it, but I find it to be a very effective bluff. Have you ever tried something like that?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, every patient has a different threshold for what can motivate them. So you think about the best people in America, and I'm using these terms loosely, but you're just most defined, articulate, upstanding citizen. And then you think about someone that's just kind of, I guess, the worst person on the planet. And, they just can't do anything right. Maybe they're incarcerated and they can't do it. And there's a spectrum of people, Darren, and you really don't know what's going to motivate someone until you try. The guy that comes in overalls in your dental office might have more money than the guy driving the Beamer. So by exercising a stair-step method, starting out very lightly, diplomatically, friendly, and increasing, will weed those people out. Some people will be motivated just by you maybe sending out a statement on a net 15 or net 20 day basis. And say net 30, that will motivate some people. Some people not so much. Maybe they need to get threatened that they're going to be turned over to collections, and then a certain portion of the patient population is going to pay that. Now, some people, maybe you're going through an awful situation, your dog got run over that morning, you're going through a divorce, you lost your job. That may not motivate you. You've got bigger fish to fry in your world. So maybe actually getting turned over to a collection company may motivate some of those people. And then let's listen, if you're going bankrupt tomorrow, nothing's going to motivate you. But I definitely say leveraging every legal means and ethical means to recover a debt, as long as you're not getting a lot of bad PR. You're not chasing your patients away or encouraging them to complain on social media. Absolutely, you want to do those things to motivate the patient to pay.
I want to come back to the social media thing if we have time, but obviously you've hinted at and alluded to collection agencies. So let's talk about that, because obviously that's the business you're in. Tell me roughly how that works. And I realize that I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, because this really should be a one-on-one conversation between you and whoever has questions. But from a high-level perspective, talk to me about, if I'm going to start looking for a collection agency, first thing they should do is call you, obviously, and because you're the expert in this. I mean, you're the ninja. Slice it. And so first thing they should do is talk to you. But in the event someone's watching this and they're in Canada where you don't have connections, or they're overseas, because we have a lot of overseas viewers, what advice can you give when they're interviewing and looking for a good collection agency? What advice would you have them, what questions would you have them ask?
Great question, Darren. And I like speaking on behalf of our industry and giving people an ethical and practical way of answering their own problems or solving their own problems. One, you want to make sure that any collection company that you talk to is licensed. And every state has licensing or bonding requirements. So I would first ask any potential collection agency what states they're licensed in. If you live on a border state, I live in South Carolina. Georgia is about an hour and a half one way, and North Carolina is about 2 hours another. If, I work with a practice on the border and we're not licensed in North Carolina, which we are, but if we aren't, then we can't legally collect on patients in another state. So making sure your agency is licensed in your locality and any bordering states. And ideally, you'd want them nationwide. Second thing, I would ask your peers. Look at your study groups. Talk to your peers. Utilize the resources. Ask your CPA or your attorney if they have a recommendation. Getting a referral from someone you trust is key. Just because a certain company is associated with some type of dental organization or association, I mean, that's great, and it probably does lead to credibility. But a lot of times those are more political decisions that are made. So you always want to, trust but verify. Anyone that you talk to should have a track record of working with dentists. I would work with someone that's dental specific, that really understands your business. So really talking to a specialist that understands, what it's like to have patients not come back for recare and to fulfill treatment plans, and can mold their approach around your practice and not just give you a standard approach. The last thing I would say is people value what you pay for. And by that, I mean that a lot of collection companies, the traditional norm is charging a percentage of what's collected. And there's some good things about that, and there's some bad things about that. What's good about it is that you don't have to pay anything. It's a very low committal relationship between you and the company. The flip side of that equation is there's a low commitment. So it's an easy point of entry to engage with the company, but they have no real ethical obligation or contractual obligation to serve you in your best needs. So if they're working with a large hospital system and you're just the sole practitioner, or maybe you have a few locations, they may not pay attention to your $300 and $400 balances when they're getting thousands of counts from the local hospital. So people tend to value what you pay for. So I would recommend that, your practices look at that. and figure out, what are you giving, what are you getting, and what are the promises that are made. But typically, the higher the commitment, the higher the value, in my experience.
I would agree with that. One of the things that was, you said something that triggered a thought in my mind that I find fascinating. When I go into the average single doc practice and I add up how many patients in the 90-day column owe $400 or more, on average, almost always, it's 19 to 23 people. And what's staggering to me about that is that 19 to 23 people accounts for 80% of the 90-day balance. Mm-hmm. So, and what's interesting to me from a psychology perspective is, someone like us comes in and all of a sudden we say, we got to fix AR. And so Susie gets yelled at by the dentist and all of a sudden she's looking at the AR list. She starts at the top and the first balance is $20. The second one's $30. The next one's $5. The next one's this. And what sadly happens is she never gets to those dollars over $400. So right. What we always teach is to focus your efforts, go through, prioritize your efforts, look for those 19 to 21 people who account for the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, and focus on those, because now I don't need you to call 300 people. I need you to call 20 people, and I need you to be very, very effective.
Right.
And my guess is if they were to call you up with some coaching through your organization, they could get some very, very effective coaching on, hey, I only need to call 20 people. Andy, talk me through how to have the most effective conversation, and I'm betting it's going to increase their efficacy a ton, and it's 20 people. When I first saw this and I saw the pattern, I was blown away. It was about 5 years ago, and I'm like, are you kidding me? It's 19, it's 21, it's 19, it's 21. I'm like, it's always the same number. It blew me away. So anyway, point is, don't overcomplicate this by the same token, and get advice from someone who's an expert. Andy was talking about getting peer evaluation or endorsement. And what's interesting is a lot of the state endorsements they're paid for, sadly. And Andy's not giving me any money. I'm not giving him any money. I'm just a big believer in who he is and what he does. If you're having issues with AR, obviously part of our job when you hire us is to help this. But if you're looking for someone who specializes, that's all they do day in and day out, so much so he can call himself a ninja, to me, Andy's the guy you should be calling. And I think he'll guide you. I have faith he'll guide you in what is the best way to remedy this and to work with our organization. Because presumably if you're watching this, you might be a client of ours. And I want to make sure that we're not just outsourcing all of the work that you hired us to do, but there are times where an expert is better. And there are times where hiring an expert service, maybe in this niche area, because your practice is so ginormous maybe, that it would be appropriate. So I want to give my glowing endorsement of who you are and what you do and what the principles you stand on, that, in my opinion, you can trust him when you throw him a call that he'll do good things.
Hey, and you brought up psychology. Can I just bring up one point?
You bet.
And this is really huge for the dentist because, right, when you think about your average dental practitioner, right, these guys go to school, guys and gals go to school for a long time. They're smart people. They make a great living. Right? We agree on that. And what traditionally happens is the psychology, the mindset of the dentist. They think that this is going to, employing some of these tactics is going to terrorize their patient base because they think about it from their self perspective. If they were turned over, just like you said, Darren, someone had threatened their credit or threatened to turn over a collection agency, they'd freak out. And rightly so. I would too. I lead a very clean life. But again, that's from the dentist perspective. The average American, 1 in 3 is in collections at all times. So often, a lot of the battle here is in the mind of the dentist. And what they find after turning accounts over to collections, quote unquote, is they get a very low response. So that is data, baseline data, back to the practice saying, hey, you care, but your patients may not. And it is always a huge epiphany when you're working. I'm working with a practice right now is going through this, and they're in awe. And that more people aren't complaining because the patients have convinced them for years, we're good people, we love you, we're going to come back. But the reality of it is they're going to another dental practice.
It's sad to see, but I totally agree with you. And fear, and given that we're starting to run long, and I don't want to make this a super long show, the fear of the repercussions of social media sadly drives a lot of business owners to avoid tough conversations. And I've been guilty of that myself at times, where I'm worried that some doctor that I decide not to take as a client because I was like, this just is not going to work, would all of a sudden blow me up on social media. So I understand the fear of it. Any concluding thoughts or advice you want to give before we wrap up?
Well, the other thing is just to be active in looking for resources to help you. Don't go it all alone, right? Dentistry's tough enough. You guys love being in the patient's mouth. I certainly couldn't do that. You guys are a special breed. That's what you love. But there's certain times, just like you alluded to, Darren, that it makes sense to do some things yourself. And then it really makes sense to use partners to help you. So that would be my concluding thought, is to engage with other partners. I mean, would you rather have your staff calling someone for an $85 pro fee visit, or would you rather them working on marketing or social media or recall or following up on treatment plans? You have thousands of dollars of treatment plans that need to be followed up on. What's a better use of their time? So looking at that from a staffing, an efficiency perspective will kind of give you a cue on whether you really think you should handle it alone or just engage with someone to take it off your plate.
I agree totally. I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you for your advice and your expertise. And again, if you guys have questions on this, I know Andy's readily available. We'd be more than happy to talk with you and your practice about what you can do to improve this area, because it's my mind, it is the most important area of the practice. That's all there is to it. If you do not have good cash flow, you do not stay in business. And it saddens me how often I go into an office and I'll see 6 figures and outdo AR or past due AR, and I'm like, oh Lordy, because the collection ratios drop. So with that being said, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it very, very much, and I look forward to seeing all of you 8 o'clock Mountain, 10 o'clock on the East Coast. Until then, have a wonderful week.
Thank you very much.
What if you could have the practice of your dreams? What's holding you back? Imagine a life where you have everything you ever wanted.